For centuries, history has painted the samurai as a man's world. Images of armored warriors charging on horseback, their swords gleaming in the sun, dominate both Japanese legend and modern pop culture. But this story is incomplete. Behind the walls of castles, in the ashes of burned villages, and even on the front lines of desperate battles, samurai women, known as Onna-bugeisha, fought, commanded, and strategized with the same fierce resolve as their male counterparts. Their story isn't just one of forgotten warriors, it's a re-evaluation of what the samurai truly were, rewriting the image of the samurai. Most people think of the samurai as purely masculine symbols of honor and war. Yet historical records from the Kamakura through the Edo periods reveal that women trained in martial arts, particularly in the use of the naginata, a curved-bladed polearm, while often dismissed as domestic defense. This weapon was not a decoration. It was designed to counter cavalry, giving women the reach and leverage to strike down armored men on horseback. In other words, the battlefield was never an exclusively male arena. What's striking is how Japanese culture later softened these images, reshaping them into polite myths of women defending households while their husbands were away. In reality, many of these women weren't waiting for men to return. They were leading, commanding, and making fateful decisions on their own. The Siege of Aizu, loyalty and steel. One example comes not from medieval Japan, but from the 19th century during the Boshin War, when the Tokugawa shogunate crumbled under imperial forces. In 1868, the Joshitai, a volunteer women's combat unit, defended Aizu Castle. These weren't symbolic warriors, they were trained fighters, some as young as 16, who joined battle. Knowing survival was unlikely. Their leader, Nakano Takeiko, is said to have killed several opponents before falling. Rather than let the enemy claim her head, her sister buried it beneath a pine tree, an act of dignity and defiance. The Joshitai story shows us that women didn't fade as Japan modernized. They adapted, resisted, and died for their clans even at the dawn of a new political age, women as strategic minds. But being a samurai woman wasn't only about weapons. In many ways, they held the most dangerous battlefield of all, the political one. Samurai households were not just family units, they were micro-governments. Marriages were strategic alliances, and wives were often responsible for managing estates, arranging alliances, and maintaining loyalty among vassals while men were at war. The wife of a daimyo wasn't simply a consort, she was a commander of resources. For instance, Hojo Masako, wife of Minamoto no Yoritomo, the first shogun of the Kamakura shogunate, became known as the Nun Shogun. After her husband's death, she maneuvered through deadly politics, sustaining her clan's dominance. Masako never held a sword in battle, but her command of networks and her ruthless decisions shaped Japan's first shogunate, the weapon of legacy. Perhaps the most overlooked power of samurai women was their ability to shape legacy. They were the ones who raised future warriors, instilling loyalty and discipline. But here's the hidden angle. They weren't simply raising sons. Samurai daughters also inherited these values, and through marriage, they transplanted loyalty, honor, and strategy into rival clans. In this sense, samurai women acted as living weapons of diplomacy, wielding their influence across generations. Think about it this way. While men's victories could be undone in a single battle, women's legacies stretched silently through bloodlines, securing influence for centuries. Myth versus reality. The myth of the passive Japanese woman emerged in the peaceful Edo period, when the shogunate sought stability after centuries of war. Manuals like Onna-bugeisha, the Greater Learning for Women, instructed women to be obedient and domestic. But this was less about tradition and more about politics. In a time of peace, the state no longer wanted women trained as warriors. It wanted them as stabilizers of the home. This rewriting of women's roles is why so many of their stories sound like exceptions rather than norms. The truth is that warrior women weren't rare. They were systematically erased from the mainstream narrative. What we learn today. So what does this reevaluation tell us? It reveals that samurai women were not shadows of their husbands, nor were they limited to acts of desperate defense. They were complete participants in the samurai ethos, fighters, governors, and architects of clan survival. It also challenges how we think about history itself. If we only remember the armored men charging into battle, we lose half the picture. The samurai spirit was not strictly masculine. It was a code lived and fought for by both men and women, a new perspective. Imagine the weight of being a woman in a world where failure meant the extinction of your clan. Imagine balancing the expectations of loyalty, honor, and obedience while wielding a naginata against invading soldiers. Imagine outmaneuvering rivals in a political game that would decide the future of your family. That was the reality of Japan's forgotten warriors. By shining light on their stories, we don't just honor a forgotten group, we redefine the samurai entirely. They weren't just men of the sword, they were communities of resilience. Bound by duty, sharpened by strategy, and carried forward by women who refused to be erased. The story of samurai women reminds us that history is never complete until all voices are heard. What do you think? Should their legacy be taught alongside the legendary samurai men? Share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more hidden histories, and join us in re-examining the past.